Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Ken Ludwig's play, The Fox on the Fairway. This is a Ken Ludwig play. And if you know my views on Ken Ludwig, which you would have gotten if you have watched any of my other videos about Ken Ludwig stuff, you know that that's about the best I can say about it. I'm not a fan of Ken Ludwig. I don't think he's an interesting or good writer. But he writes stuff that community theaters like to put on. So there's that. The Fox on the Fairway is a golf-themed farce. And if that does not immediately sound promising as a source of comedy, boy howdy. Yeah, you're right. The golf jokes are fine for what they are, bearing in mind that they're golf jokes. So always going to have a fairly limited degree of humor. The plot of the farce revolves around this inter-club golf tournament between Quail Valley, where our protagonists are located, and Crouching Squirrel, professional home of our antagonist, Dickie Bell. So Dickie Bell is this sort of obnoxious guy. He is pitted against primarily Henry Bingham, who is the manager of Quail Valley, along with Mrs. Peabody. Justin Hicks and Louise Heinbetter are employees of Quail Valley who get generally roped into playing in this golf tournament when it's discovered that they're really, really good at golf. And then Muriel, presumably Muriel Bingham, although I don't think her last name is ever explicitly stated, who's Henry's wife. Dickie Bell and Henry Bingham make a largish wager. When I say largish, I mean more than I'm worth. So if Dickie loses, he loses $200,000. If Henry loses, he loses $100,000 plus his wife's antique shop, The Old Crock. Now, Henry doesn't particularly like his wife, but he also knows that she will kill him. Like, she will beat him to death if he loses the antique shop. So he is not keen on taking the bet, but Dickie goads him into taking it. Dickie then reveals that the ringer, Steve Trampelmain, that Henry had brought into his club to try and win this golf tournament, has changed clubs. He has joined Crouching Squirrel and left Quail Valley. So Henry is now convinced that he's going to lose until he realizes that Justin Hicks, his new employee, is actually really good at golf, better than Steve Trampelmain. And so they sort of skirt the rules by somewhat sketchily initiating Justin into the club and then putting him in the tournament. Now, this does actually violate the rules because it is established very early on that no new name can be entered into the tournament book less than 24 hours before play begins. It's not 100% clear why Dickie Bell never says, that's a new name in the tournament book, you cannot have him play for you. I mean, that's a huge plot hole that either Ken Ludwig didn't notice or didn't care to resolve. but it legitimately is a conflict because Bingham tries to bring out that rule to argue that Dickie can't have Tramplemain on his team. And Dickie argues, whether this argument would stand up to a sort of inquiry or whatever, that Tramplemain's name is in the book, it's just in the wrong column, and therefore he's legal to play for Crouching Squirrel. But Justin Hicks's name is not in the book 24 hours before play begins. And so it does seem like that would be the simplest and most straightforward way for Dickie, to whom this rule has been read just minutes ago, to say, you can't have this guy. But that's never addressed. Nor is it addressed much later in the play when Louise Hindvetter gets inducted into the club as the replacement for Justin after he breaks his arm. Again, it seems like this should be an easy way to, stop what Bingham is doing and for Dickie Bell to win, but he doesn't. And again, I think that's just sloppiness on Ludwig's part. So anyway, stuff is going on. There's a bunch of nonsense romantic bullshit because Henry doesn't actually like his wife. Muriel doesn't seem to like him very much. Mrs. Peabody and Henry are actually in love and they're meant to be together. Dickie and Muriel are in love and they're meant to be together, but they're all sort of not like coming to terms with that, like emotionally responsible adult human beings. They're dragging it out and being stupid about it, etc., etc. Also, Louise and Justin are engaged, and they're sort of on again, off again, having these big emotional reactions to, in some cases, fairly substantial things. Like Louise accidentally flushes his grandmother's engagement ring down the toilet. That seems like a legitimate thing to get somewhat upset about. But then they sort of say stupid things to each other that they each blow out of proportion, etc., etc. And so that whole thing, and that affects Justin's golf game, which affects the other plot, etc., etc. It's farce. It's farce built around golf and people not being married to the right people. It's fine. That being said, there are, so one of the things about farce is that it depends on sets of unlikely coincidences. Some of them don't seem to be justified by the story. So, for instance, when it is revealed very late in the play that Louise is actually the illegitimate daughter of Bingham and Mrs. Peabody, who had sex one time on graduation night, Henry's like, but I thought I was shooting blanks. Why? Why as a, I mean, presumably this is a high school graduation. Why as an 18-year-old guy would you be like, I'm probably infertile? That seems like the most likely thing. That's not really a thing that most 18-year-old guys, I think, would assume. And that's never addressed again. Like that, there's that one reference to that. And you're like, why? Why would you think, why? I mean, that might be a thing that like if you're a sexual predator or sexually dubious, you might say that to a woman to try and get her to have unprotected sex with you. But you would generally, I think, say that knowing A, that you're a fucking scumbag, and B, that you were lying. But why would you as an 18-year-old be like, yeah, I'm probably infertile, no worries. Like, that's not a thing that most people assume at age 18. So that doesn't make that much sense to me without something else in the play to explain that. Henry also then slightly later than that is like, I've found out I have a daughter that I always wanted. What? Since when? Nothing in this play has ever suggested that Bingham wanted a child, wanted a daughter specifically, etc. There's nothing that seems particularly paternal about him. He seems very self-centered. I throw that in. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, to the extent that it's meant to sort of say, oh, yes, Bingham's a good guy. He actually will be a good dad to this now adult human being. But it doesn't make that much sense, right? And also, here's another problem with that whole storyline. They had sex once on graduation night. Henry and Mrs. Peabody grew up together. They were good friends. They grew up together in this country club, along with Dickie Bell and Muriel. So these people have all known each other their entire lives. But following graduation and following having sex with her, Henry apparently totally missed the fact that the very next thing that happened in the following 9 months of his close friend whom he had just fucked's life was that she got pregnant and had a child. Now, this might be a sort of 19th century thing where, like, this English heiress has gotten pregnant out of wedlock, so we send her to Switzerland for a year so she can have that baby, and nobody in England will know. That might have happened. But there is no indication of that. Nothing in the story explains that she ever went away. I mean, it seems like these people have just lived in this country club their entire lives. They've been in this town, they've been raised together, etc., etc. How the fuck did Bingham miss that the person he had just fucked has now had a baby? Like, I know 18-year-old brains are not fully developed. But you would think that he might put 2 and 2 together. Also, the fact that this is the first time it ever comes up in the play that she has had a child at all. It's such a big, gaping, problematic coincidence of unexplained bullshit that doesn't really make sense as soon as you start asking questions about it. And I get that it's farce, and the objective is to not ask questions, but that seems like a problem. With the amount of time that Henry spends complaining about his marriage to Muriel, you could throw in, I've always wanted children, and we've never been able to have them, or something like that. You could throw in a line where Mrs. Peabody's like, oh yes, my 9-month holiday in Switzerland, or whatever it is. You could solve these problems with 2 lines, 3 lines, whatever it is, just sprinkled into the play, and they are not there, right? This play also has a terrible monologue from Bingham. I don't mean to keep picking on Bingham, but he is the protagonist, and a lot of the problems cohere around him. And this is not just my view. I read this. This was a very unusual reading experience because I read this play actually for the first time at a tech rehearsal for Sock Buskin's forthcoming, or probably when this video goes up immediately having just finished, production of the play. So I'm assisting with tech. So I read this play actually for the first time in the script as I was following along for the lighting cues. We got to this one speech where Bingham is trying to motivate Justin to win this tournament, and he's giving him this speech about the history of golf and its traditions and how it's like a religion and like Zen. And Jesus fucking Christ. The director who was sitting next to me, Joe Appel, who's an amazing guy, turned to me and he's like, "You're a literary guy. This seems to me like the worst monologue ever written." Yeah, it is. Nobody gives a fuck about the history of golf. It isn't important, Ken Ludwig. It doesn't matter. It's not motivational. It's not inspiring. What are you doing? I get that this is about golf, and that's probably a limited subject matter. I don't mean to keep sort of knocking golf. Golf is fine. It is what it is. I don't play, but I have friends who do. But it isn't interesting or inspiring that golf was invented in Scotland. And also, he puts in this bit where it's like, golf first emerged when the ancient Egyptians bashed their enemies' heads with clubs. No, it didn't. That's not golf. That's not in any sense like golf. Also, the Egyptians did not invent club warfare. So, I don't know. It is this weird thing. It's a terrible speech. It shouldn't be in there. But a lot of it shouldn't be in there. Because the other big problem I have with this, and I feel this way, I think about a number of Ken Ludwig plays, is this is maybe uncharitable to Ken Ludwig. I will 100% openly admit that. I feel that Ken Ludwig is a tryhard. What I mean by that is I think he is aware that he is a writer of farces, and that farces are not that... I don't want to say serious, because obviously they're not. The premise of them is not to be serious, but they're not that critically weighty, right? I think I get this sense, based on the Ken Ludwig plays I've seen and read, that he is very concerned that people will think of him as just a writer of cheap farces. And so he throws in all these references to Homer, to Shakespeare, to these other sort of high culture things that don't really make sense in the context of what this play is about. They have nothing to do with golf. They don't really make sense generally for the characters saying these things. They don't really make that much sense in terms of where they are in the plot. They're just stuck in there. And I think Ludwig is trying to say, hey, look how smart I am. I know the classics. I'm not just a dumb farce writer. I am also a smart, knowledgeable, witty fellow. But it's one of those things where, for me at least, it does not come across as, oh yes, he's made a Shakespeare reference. What a clever guy. It comes across as, bro, you're trying too hard. It's a little bit pathetic. You're not showing us that you are witty and sophisticated. You're showing us that you're trying really, really hard to be witty and sophisticated. And the problem with being witty and sophisticated is that if you are witty and sophisticated, it generally does not seem that you are trying to be. So